So this lecture is continuing with the 1920s, and in this case, we're going to explore the 20s and one of the more infamous social political developments of the era, and that's Prohibition, the prohibition on alcohol, or an era in the United States history when alcohol was illegal and buying and consuming it was a crime. And this is kind of tailing along on what had happened post World War One, and this is kind of tied into it a bit. The progressives are at a strange period, progressive ideology, because it's their whole outlook has been kind of crushed by the First World War, and it has made them a much less optimistic bunch. But there's a lot of there's a lot less desire to follow their beliefs by a lot of Americans, that they feel that progressivism is kind of it doesn't really hasn't really worked out, that the world is not always progressing in a positive direction in a good way. But there's also kind of some resurgence of progressivism too in a slight way, because there's a sense that the world needs order and stability post World War One, and the progressives are kind of hoping that this will be their last, that is another chance for them to try to prove this, that they can try to make change and legislate social change in this era of uncertainty. But let's set up the 1920s first. The 1920s are actually quite prosperous economically, even if people are a bit more nihilistic and a little less optimistic about the ability of humans to change the way of the world. Economically, they're quite prosperous and people are doing quite well. Factories are producing a lot more. They had gotten quite efficient during the war. A lot more factories were using assembly lines and mass production to create products for fighting the war, things like artillery and tanks and vehicles, clothing, rations, you name it. Everything had gotten a bit of a boost during war production because there was such a high demand to meet the needs of the war in Europe. So after the war is done, you still have all these assembly lines and really good factories ready. So what they start doing is churning out luxury goods. They start doing things like producing automobiles, which become a lot more affordable for the average American, and it becomes less of a luxury and more of just a staple. Almost everybody has a car, especially in urban areas. People are buying a lot of cars, things like Ford Model Ts and some of the later Ford models too become pretty widespread, and it becomes kind of a symbol of just American identity and just American appeal. The country is also quite prosperous because the United States was able to take advantage of the fact that other places are quite in tatters after the war just utterly decimated, and the United States start investing the US dollar abroad, and a lot of these multinational companies may eventually serve to make the US dollar the most valuable currency, replacing the very depleted European pound and the British pound. The dollar becomes kind of the standard for global currency. So a lot of it is because the US is quite prosperous. They're able to do this, and they're prosperous because they have a lot of factories. But keep in mind, the United States is also extremely prosperous because it didn't get walloped during the First World War. Things did kind of work out for the United States, despite how there's plenty of grumbling, rightfully so in many cases, that they didn't really see a great result, that the world didn't suddenly turn into a utopia because of the First World War. But the US comes out on top. It was on the side of the Allies that won. It had not seen any destruction from trench warfare. It had only lost 116,000 Americans. That's You don't want to see that number. You don't want to say that was nothing, but compared to the millions upon millions that were lost in Europe, the United States is doing okay after the First World War when you compare them to how Europe is doing. So compared to Europe, the United States is on top of the world right now. And all of those factories churning out luxury goods, factories that were not bombed to perdition, like factories in Europe, all of those factories churning out luxury goods is creating a consumer society in the United States for really the first time. You're starting to see a society where there's a lot of advertising and spending on leisure activities and leisure products, things that you do not need to survive. This is not food. This is not really just generic clothing. It's nice stuff, luxury, prosperous items for a luxurious, prosperous nation. non-necessities are what people are buying in a consumer society because those factories are churning stuff out. They need to create a demand to meet. So it's going to be very consumerist, non-necessity products that Americans are purchasing, sometimes even on credit, because there's so much cool stuff out there that you can buy this stuff and pay for it later. You could buy it on a tab or buy it on credit, like a credit card. You can sort of open a tab at the local store, and when you get your paycheck, then you pay them back eventually. So people are loaning more money, they're borrowing money to buy this stuff. And you start to see a proliferation of advertising as well. Things like Coca-Cola advertises very heavily in the 1920s, and it's very much a luxury item. You don't need Coca-Cola to survive. That's a treat. You have it because it tastes good if you like soda, which I don't, but plenty of people do. So there you have it. But people are buying lots of stuff to entertain themselves or that to enjoy. They're going to movies. Movies are affordable now. It's also just technologically available. Moving pictures, that's a luxury. Radios, people are buying radios for their homes to listen to music and news. More phonographs, more records, record players to have music and entertainment. And time-saving, labor-saving luxury items like vacuum cleaners and refrigerators, which are replacing ice boxes. So you don't have to worry about getting ice to stuff in this big cold cabinet. You just plug it in because you have electricity and you have a refrigerator. So Americans are getting a bit spoiled now here. They're getting to be a very consumer society. Even the middle lower class Americans can afford a Coca-Cola. So the luxury becomes quite widespread. And with all of this going on, there is a lot of change for women going on too. We'll talk a little bit about some of the other social issues. It's not all fun and games in the 20s, even though they're called the Roaring 20s, and women are wearing short dresses and cutting their hair short and having lots of fun. There's plenty of social issues going on as well here too. And when it comes to women, a lot is changing for women. They are becoming increasingly sexually liberated during this time. There are a lot of famous female movie stars that emerge in the age of early silent movies. Women who are glamorous and luxurious and have very short hair, and they date handsome men, and it becomes very appealing to a lot of women to emulate that. Women at this time who wear the short, flappy dresses become known as flappers, and they are a bit of the new breed of woman at this time, where they're going to wear short dresses, have short hair, smoke, have premarital sex, live in urban areas, go to movies, and it all seems to many people quite scary to see all this social change, but it is very appealing to a lot of young people. This is an era of a lot of younger people emerging as their own real, having their own identity, going to movies and dressing different from their stodgy old parents. But a lot of political change is happening for women as well. With all this new sexual freedom, and there's a push for even more political freedom for women, and there's a push to codify an equal rights amendment, and the charge is very much led by reformer Alice Paul, who represented the National Woman's Party, and she and her followers really wanted to add an equal rights amendment to the Constitution to eliminate any and all legal sex-based inequalities because they felt that having the right to vote wasn't enough. Women got the right to vote by 1919, 1920, but they felt that there was still so many other sex-based legal inequalities that needed to be dealt with, that an equal rights amendment to sort of purge all gender disparities needed to be on the books. Things like employment, education, women were still feeling kind of the effects of that. However, there is the Equal Rights Amendment, and the National Women's Party is never really successful ever with an Equal Rights Amendment because there's too much pushback from other women that felt that eliminating sex-based inequalities would also remove some of the benefits that women enjoyed, just like back during the issue with suffrage and right to vote, women are still quite concerned about being drafted, that was a good inequality that they enjoyed, that they did not want to be drafted into the military, or that certain labor laws prevented women from working too long. That was seen as a protection by some. So this is a bit of a controversy, and it crops back up in the 60s and it gets pushed down again, an equal rights amendment. So women are quite politically active. There's also several other politically active organizations dealing with some of the social fallout of the 1920s. American Civil Liberties Union is founded in 1920. It's an outgrowth of an earlier organization called the Civil Liberties Bureau that popped up in 1917. And this was an attempt during the 20s to prevent any further civil liberties abuses from happening like they saw during the First World War. If you recall the Espionage Act and the Sedition Act from 1918, where Americans' freedom of speech was curtailed in the name of national security. You weren't allowed to criticize the government or criticize the war because it was seen as a threat to national unity and security. Plenty of Americans felt that that was a violation of their civil liberties, and that war was a very good excuse to violate them, and that you really had to, it was a slippery slope. So the American Civil Liberties Union is founded to try to be a bit of a watchdog organization and make sure that the government cannot abridge any of those rights. A lot of it grew in support after those Palmer raids, after the execution of Sacco and Vanzetti. So there is a lot of political agitation in the 20s too. Again, not all fun and games, but plenty of good music. Social political stuff going on too. The Harlem Renaissance takes place in the 1920s. This is the growth of popularity and sort of a recognition of African American artists, writers, and musicians that really kind of comes through with appreciation for jazz, dances, a lot of stuff that has its origins in the Black community. Um, a lot of this is coming on the heels of World War One because there is a lot of dissatisfaction in the Black community of not having gotten better rights after having fought in the war, and also so there's a kind of a push for more recognition. But there's also just more Black Americans in the North now. Mostly before that Great Migration, they'd been in the South, and now when they're in the North, more people in the North are being exposed to this culture, and it's one that becomes quite prolific and almost mainstream. I mean, 20s and jazz, that's really you can't have the 1920s without some awesome jazz and some great dancing, and that's what a lot of the of Black culture brings to the 1920s. The Cotton Club becomes a super awesome hot play. You had to, if you were anybody, you were going to the Cotton Club to do some epic dancing, doing the Charleston. Look that one up. Go watch a video of people dancing the Charleston and dancing the Black Bottom. It's hot stuff. I can't do it. I've tried. Trust me. You don't want to see video of me trying to do the Charleston, but it becomes pretty accepted at the time. And a lot of this Renaissance begins with Black Americans coining this idea of wanting to see appreciation for their culture and hoping to establish an idea of a new Negro is the term that many of them used, who wanted to sort of break stereotypes of Blackness being associated with being kind of meek and subservient. They wanted more militancy and just pride in heritage too. And this is what the Renaissance brings. Um, however, a lot of it becomes, instead of being really appreciated as Black culture, it's more of kind of appropriated into, as I mentioned, more mainstream stuff. A lot of white Americans would see it as just sort of a something exotic and adventurous to do, to go slumming, to go visit the poorer parts of town and go to Black-owned clubs or Black nightclubs and kind of observe what's going on. It was part of the exotic adventure of the day, but there were plenty um, of things that did sort of bring Black culture more into the minds of Americans, going to the Cotton Club and watching singers like Cab Calloway. Cab Calloway, if you ever look up a video of him, Cab Calloway is a great singer. He has this very fast tone, very great, evocative songs. Josephine Baker, she's a beautiful dancer. She does this. Okay, look up the banana dance. If you take a moment, go out and watch Josephine Baker's banana dance. That's pretty provocative. If that doesn't make you want to go see a sexy banana dance, I don't know what will. But it's Black artists and performers that become mainstream. However, it doesn't really the appreciation of a lot of their type of music and dancing and performance is seen as just exotic and entertaining, not necessarily equivalent with the desire to grant rights to anybody, to other other sects, other races in the United States. Still kind of riding that wave of progressive era ideology about racial hierarchy. Um, Religious stuff is going on too. So there's a lot of turmoil, a lot of just social upheaval going on in the 20s. You've got a lot of change in the economy, more luxury goods. You've got things going on with women, with pushes for women's rights still beyond just the right to vote, so more legal equality. You've got more presses pushing um, for more visibility of Black culture. You've also got issues with religion cropping up because with all of this change that I just listed, there is a lot of people who are there's going to be a backlash against it. And fundamentalism is a religious school of thought that is really best described as a backlash by all of this change going on. Fundamentalists are Protestants, so very traditional, old school American Protestants who were quite concerned about everything going on. Growing cultural pluralism, like the Harlem Renaissance, and even things like more visibility of Catholics and Jews. They felt that these traditional values were their traditional values of the sanctity of the family were eroding with women's sexual liberation, and that nobody really cared about church anymore because of all this emphasis on individuality and going out and having fun and watching movies and drinking Coca-Cola, driving a car. I don't know. Um, One of the biggest fundamentalists out there, kind of the poster child, poster man, I would hesitate to, I don't know if he was ever a child, was Billy Sunday, and he's pretty cool. Definitely worth uh, knowing about Billy Sunday here. He used to be a baseball player. When he sees all the change going on in the world, he is motivated to try to restore an appreciation for traditional values of the sanctity of family and hard work and chastity and whatnot. And he becomes a preacher, and he is all about the evils of the modern world. And he is a very fire and brimstone preacher. He is very active, he is very loud, very outspoken, and Billy Sunday gets a reputation for just being a real character. Like he is entertaining to listen to and watch and hear on the radio for Americans. He is active. I mean, this is him drawings of him. He is known for giving in his sermons, he's moving around, he is getting his steps in. He is an active fellow when he is preaching his doctrine. He would point, he would jump, he would stand on podiums and scream. Very much fire and brimstone, old-timey, kind of like First Great Awakening style stuff going on here about all sorts of issues that Americans should be aware of, like the evils of alcoholism and sexual promiscuity, and even the growing threat of Darwinism, this growing acceptance of the theory of evolution, of Charles Darwin's thoughts on evolution as the accepted answer for why people are the way they are. Because prior to that, there was the thought that the only real true answer for why people are people and why we walk on two legs and talk and do what we do is because of the story of the Bible about how God created man and woman and it just kept going from there. So there's that had been nobody had really questioned that for a very long time. And if you did, you kind of kept it to yourself, I suppose. But when Charles Darwin has his he publishes his treatise, his text on evolution, a lot of people naturally start to question this and they start thinking about his ideas about evolution and humans sort of evolving from a early proto-hominids or apes. And this is seen as a threat to religious leaders. It's seen as a threat to stability, and that it's sort of like this cartoon shows. It was kind of the evil Piper's song of Darwin's hypothesis of evolution, kind of leading people to a dark place of disbelief in God and the Bible. If there's that science was somehow inimical to religion, that the two were incompatible. You couldn't, if you were using science to explain the world, then that kind of disproved God, or that was going against God, or it questioned your faith. There was very incompatible schools of thought, science and religion at the time. I think a lot of people have been able to kind of um, end up, in a sense, maybe um, reconciling those two things, that it's you can believe in science and have a religion as well, but it was a difficult process to integrate these at the time, I suppose. But what happens really is the apotheosis, we'll say, of the science versus religion battle that went down in the 20s was the Scopes trial that happened in 1926. And what happens with this is sort of fundamentalism and a fear of modernity and science coming to a head. 1926, a Tennessee school teacher named John Scopes was arrested for teaching evolution in school because that was against the law. You were supposed to teach the story of creation as part of your students' curriculum. And Scopes was arrested, he was put on trial, and his trial is broadcast nationally over the radio. And the trial of the Scopes trials, also known as the monkey trial, was Scopes trying to defend himself and saying, I was only trying to teach another idea, versus a lot of people saying, no, you were trying to lead these children down the path of no return to disbelief in God, as sort of this evil Pied Piper, like this cartoon shows. The trial is really evocative of the ongoing debate many Americans are having in their own heads, maybe, or just that's going on in society, of the ultimate battle of tradition and modernity and new understandings in science. You know, people are, it puts these tensions in very stark relief about what's going on um, in society. So people, the Scopes trial and just sort of the debate over it, it really highlights this ongoing debate of religion versus science and how uncomfortable people are even growing with how much change is going on in their daily lives. And there's a lot of change. There is more backlash against the changes happening in the United States. The Ku Klux Klan makes a return. They pop back up again. Remember them? They had emerged during Reconstruction as a way to try to restore order in the South after the end of slavery. The federal government was forced to pass those enforcement laws. They went in, they put the Klan down because they were quite violent, and it lays low for a while. But it reemerges in 1915 with a case involving a man named Leo Frank. And the Klan, had been pretty quiet for a while. Still some sentiment brewing, but they weren't very overt. The Klan comes back, and it comes back with a slightly different face. And in this case, it's much more anti-immigrant than it is anti-African American. Still anti-African American, of course, but a little bit um, more nuanced, I suppose. Their message is slightly different. What happens in 1915? What am I saying with Leo Frank here? Leo Frank was a Jewish immigrant factory owner, and in the South, he's down in the deep South. He is, I think it's Georgia. Yes, it is Georgia. He is accused of raping and murdering a very young girl, and he is lynched for it. So there was never really a trial. Leo Frank is simply found guilty because of his status of being an outsider. He's a Jewish immigrant. He's in the Deep South. A white girl is found raped and killed. He is the prime suspect. He is lynched, and it elicits a wave of anti-immigrant sentiment that the Klan then bursts back out of hiding and is able to ride on. The new Klan, the second iteration of the Ku Klux Klan, is one that advocates much more heavily to keep out immigrants because they felt it threatened Americanism, that this was what was causing so many issues in the United States, that they were the ones bringing in new ideas about religion, and they were kind of diluting the Anglo-Saxon values as this. They're marching in a parade here, the Klan, and their whole platform was America first, one God, one country, one flag. So they're all about homogenization and one culture, not accepting new ideas about religion, not really being culturally pluralistic or anything like that. They're much more anti-Jewish, anti-Catholic, anti-Black, and very overt about it. So they felt that this was all of these new influences and new things were damaging to the United States. So a lot, boy, still it never seems to relax now, does it? Time to get into the temperance movement, because yes, that's still a kicking in the 1920s, and it's kicking hard. The progressives had suffered quite heavily. Their very optimistic ideology had suffered quite heavily with the First World War, but they also have a little bit of a foot in the door because people are looking for stability with all of the chaos happening around them. War, racial tensions, the Klan, challenges to religion, new people dancing the Charleston. I mean, it's all over the place. It's a lot. And the temperance movement is going to very much position itself as a way to return to traditional values and also stabilize society. Temperance movements had been around for quite some time. They have a very long history, and reformers had often posited temperance or alcohol abstinence as the best thing for society and especially for women. So this is kind of riding that wave of social change and women's rights too. Um, Reformers had often believed that it was the children and the women that suffered from alcohol consumption because men went out, drank their wages away, came home violent, and beat their wives and children, and then had no money to spend on food and clothing. This cartoon is very unsubtle. Daddy's in there, and you got these sad children outside a saloon, and it says, and our shoes and stockings and clothes and food are in there too, and they'll never come out because dad's in there blowing the paycheck on alcohol. And if a lot of people were also thinking that the only one who really benefited from alcohol was large corporations like brewers. There was a movement where voting for temperance was you were either a wet, you were in favor of alcohol consumption, or you were a dry, and you wanted people to have like a dry town where they couldn't sell alcohol. And the dry vote was the vote of the women in the family. So it's very much advertised in political campaigning as something that will benefit families. And this is, I want to say again and again until you're sick of it. This is still progressivism as well. Because what is it doing? It's seeing a problem, it's making a big deal about that problem, and it's trying to legislate a solution, trying to pass a law to either ban something or protect something. And that is really still the soul of progressivism. They're a little crushed from the war, but they're not dead yet. And it is World War I, surprisingly, that helps give another push to the temperance movements and to the progressives. Support for prohibition rises because alcohol production during the war was seen as a waste of resources. If you were brewing beer, or if you were making whiskey or corn liquor, that wheat, that barley, that corn could have been used to feed a soldier or to feed people. So you've got advertisements like this, will you back me or will you back booze? The soldiers are being utilized, a soldier iconography is being utilized to kind of guilt Americans into saying, don't don't support alcohol consumption because it's a waste of resources during the conflict. It was also seen as something that only benefited the Germans or could potentially be something that helped them out. The saloon backer is a traitor to his country. Why? Well, who is brewing beer? The Germans. Beer was something that was seen as beer brewing breweries were seen as occupations, businesses that were German operated, German run, and beneficial to them. So you have this anti-German sentiment that was quite prolific at the time during the First World War, because that was the evil Hun. You didn't want to do anything to help the Hun, now did you? So you better ban alcohol. And all these sentiments kind of rise together. You had a lot of sentiment for getting rid of alcohol rise during the war, building on a long history of alcohol being seen as a factor that is very detrimental to society, in particular women and children. That's been going on since like the 1850s, the era of reform. They were talking about alcohol being unnatural and just quite bad for everybody. And they win. The dries, the temperance movements, they finally get enough support. They've got enough leverage after the war that they pass the 18th Amendment, ratified on January 16th, 1919, taking effect in 1920, that the United States is dry. There is a prohibition on alcohol production and consumption, and the world enters the era of prohibition where alcohol is illegal. They're going to see if that fixes the problems. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. So sorry, I don't know if you figured that one out or not, but it doesn't end up solving the world's problems. It actually creates a whole host of new ones, which we'll talk about shortly. This is the text from the amendment here. After 1 year from the ratification of this article, the manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors within the importation thereof unto or the exportation thereof from the United States and all the territories subject to the jurisdiction, blah, 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 is there hereby prohibited. Notice it doesn't make the actual like you can still drink it in the privacy of your own home if you have some like old wine. They're not going to burst in through the windows like a SWAT team and come and pin you down and arrest you. But you can't manufacture it and you can't transport it. So that really kind of takes the wind out from a lot of sales of people who operated bars or taverns or breweries because that really cuts it off at the beginning there. So the 18th Amendment takes place, goes into effect 1920. We enter an age of prohibition, and that's going to solve social instability. That's going to solve a lot of crime because people attributed alcoholism to crimes, that's what made people do crimes was alcohol. But it turns out it just makes a lot more crime. Because guess what happens is when this is illegal, everybody just starts to do it illegally. So you just made a lot of stuff illegal, and you've just made more things crimes that people will still be doing because you've criminalized a lot of activity that people will still engage in. What happens is people see an economic opportunity to sell alcohol because the demand is even greater now because you can't get it legally. You're still, it almost makes it like more sexy. You know, you want it because you can't have it. It's the forbidden fruit. Uh, and people see an opportunity to create a black market for it since liquor is still in high demand. People who make and transport their own liquor that they make secretly from illegal stills are known as bootleggers, and they would create these stills. They would brew and make their own alcohol, sometimes quite questionably so, with dubious health and sanitation rules applied. So there was still illegal transportation, and there were still illegal places to consume it, known as speakeasies, which were usually secret underground bars where people got together to drink the bootleg alcohol. So it was called a speakeasy supposedly because you were supposed to speak easy and be kind of quiet about it because if you were too loud and raucous, the police would come and you'd all get arrested for drinking. So this is a very kind of romanticized idea of the 20s where you have flappers dancing in their flappy dresses with short hair and having sex and listening to jazz and drinking bootleg alcohol in a speakeasy. I mean, that's the 1920s. That's a caricature of the 20s right there. But it shows that prohibition was kind of doomed from the start because people almost instantly start to violate it. It's probably the most violated amendment ever on the Constitution. I don't know if there's a study on that, but I would wager that it's pretty close. And crime skyrockets during Prohibition too, because again, now that you've criminalized something, you've just created a whole new category of crime. And it also just elicits more violent behavior because now that it's illegal and it's in and there is it sort of attracts a criminal underbelly of the country to participate in bootleg sales and running speakeasies. A lot of gangsters, a lot of organized crime gets involved in manufacturing and selling alcohol because it's so lucrative. Um, it leads to a lot of this crime syndicates and widespread corruption, police looking the other way because they're getting paid off by very wealthy crime bosses who are making tons of money selling alcohol. It really this makes a lot of historians see prohibition, the prohibition of alcohol, as a failure because the whole idea was to stabilize the country and reduce crime and murder and suffering, and all it does is increase it because it's people want it, they're willing to pay extra to get it. You have a lot of violent individuals who do anything to keep their territory where they're selling the illegal alcohol and to run their speakeasies. They're willing to murder the competition. They're willing to kill police officers. You have a lot of organized crime develop. They spread corruption. They even, uh, all sorts of horrible stuff happens. You see by this chart, here is murder, and assault by firearm rates. Here's 1919. Here's Prohibition begins, whoop, it goes really high up, and then Prohibition ends and it starts to go down. So you can see even that the rate of murders and deaths really does see a marked increase during the era of Prohibition because of just the rise of organized crime that are capitalizing on the demand for alcohol, even though it is illegal. So this is the era of the gangster in the movies where you'll see they'll have like a submachine gun and they'll be riding around the streets of Chicago shooting at the competition and people screaming and it's the era of like the James Cagney style Chicago era Al Capone gangster, and they're all just making money on selling illegal alcohol, and there's just really not a good way around it because plenty of people don't agree with this law. They don't agree with prohibition. There's police officers and politicians willing to look the other way because they want to go to a speakeasy in the evening too. Prohibition's also actually very dangerous as well because now that alcohol consumption is made illegal and nobody is there to monitor the quality of it, it leads to a lot of pretty dubious stuff happening. It also leads to people getting killed because the government officials had tried really hard to make sure that people weren't drinking industrial alcohol. Because alcohol is a good solvent. You still need it in for industrial purposes. It's like used to be an ingredient in paint thinner. Certain artillery rounds for weapons need alcohol components. So it's an industrial substance. And the government was kind of worried that people were going to drink it, that they were going to drink the industrial alcohol because they couldn't get the real stuff. So what they do is they use this poison known as methanol and they dump it in a lot of industrial alcohol, and people still drink it anyway because they don't realize it's poison. And a lot of times the method of figuring out what alcohol had been poisoned with methanol so that people wouldn't drink it and which ones hadn't. The process of adding methanol to industrial alcohol to make it undrinkable is known as denaturing. So to denature alcohol, you basically dump poison in it so that it's still used as an industrial chemical, but you can't consume it. And supposedly the laws went that you were supposed to label denatured alcohol or methanol poisoned alcohol with these labels like this, that it was completely denatured, it was for mechanical processes only, it was a poison, but it was very easy to peel these labels off and for very unscrupulous people to try to filter out the methanol and then sell the alcoholic product. And it led to a lot of deaths as well. So we're adding to the death and misery here. Many people felt that this was government murders, that this is the people who supported the end of prohibition or taking it off the books felt that death by poison alcohol was just the government murdering its citizens because they're the ones dumping methanol into these products. They're the ones denaturing it, uh, um, and causing all of this death simply because they didn't want people to drink. They really didn't care enough about their citizens to not do this because you don't need the only reason you put methanol in alcohol is so that people can't drink it. It doesn't make a difference with quality. So a lot of people felt that by distributing poison, you were just not doing the right thing for your citizens. So there's a lot of detractors to prohibition. People they oppose prohibition because they see the rise in crime, but they also see just the rise of kind of this callous behavior where the government is just so willing to do anything to stop people drinking that they'll even poison them. And there's not a lot of sympathy for people who died from drinking denatured alcohol because the thought was, well, you should have just not been drinking alcohol in the first place. Even people who didn't know, they'd been sold it, they didn't know it was tampered with. They thought they were buying pretty decent, something from a reputable bar, and it turns out it had poison in it. So a lot of people criticize prohibition as making the government kind of mean-spirited and turning people into very callous, uncaring individuals because of their willingness to try to force people to follow someone else's morals, very much seen as an imposition of social norms. You can oppose alcohol. That just means, and people felt, well, if you don't want to drink alcohol, then just don't drink. But you shouldn't force other people to not drink either, and even kill them if they have to. So I just want to be clear, they're not like poisoning alcohol on purpose. They don't want to kill people. But the fact that they are poisoning alcohol so people can't drink it does end up killing people, and it's seen as just kind of a bad move that it's bad publicity for the government to be doing this in the first place. And it shows that people really aren't this is not a good law if people are almost willing to risk possibly drinking tainted alcohol just to get something that people clearly still want. The desire is still there for alcoholic beverages. And a lot of another criticism the that people had for prohibition is that it was simply allowing the government to become way too powerful because they do need to expand their footprint in order to successfully monitor and uh, police prohibition and enforce it. Prohibition leads to a lot more prisons because now that you have a lot more things that are criminalized, you have a lot more criminals, and the government needs to create prisons to put them in. So the government is getting more powerful, creating more prisons, and it also is people feel it as a bad precedent of the government taking action against immorality. It would be like the government coming in and banning premarital sex. Like that is a moral thing that you can either decide that you adhere to or not, and it shouldn't be up to the government to say if you to force you to be a moral person or not. Instead, it's a lot of people felt that this was a step too far into people's personal lives by forcing them to not be able to drink. And that should be a personal choice. You know, if I want to drink or not is up to me. If I think drinking is morally wrong, that's fine. I can just not drink. They shouldn't be telling people it's morally wrong and making them not drink. So it really brings up this continuing debate over the role of the government in individual freedom. You know, how much freedom is too much freedom? How much freedom should Americans enjoy? How big should the federal government get? Because they're wondering if it's right to impose this via legislation, to impose someone's morals on others via the laws. And it's also just a debate over the federal government growing too big and powerful and spending too much money because, yeah, prohibition costs the government a lot of money. Prisons aren't free to build, they're not free to staff. It involves a lot more bureaucratic levels of management. So the government grows in power and control, and it just becomes a larger, big presence in people's daily lives. And a lot of people did not approve of that because they felt that the government should stay small and that the government should also simply stay out of what they did in the privacy of their own homes.